On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, hope for turning a new leaf after a record voter turnout in Hong Kong. What's next for the HKSAR? And commitment to open education, according to the University of Chicago president, in today's governance makes a difference.
People can disagree with you without being evil.
And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. We begin today's show in Hong Kong, where the results of the district council elections were released on Monday. More than 2.9 million people voted this year's poll. Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, said the Hong Kong HKSAR government respects the election results. In the past few months, though, violent protests rocked Hong Kong, causing widespread chaos and uncertainty. The district council election is the first poll held since the unrest. So what's next for the region? What can be expected from Hong Kong's district councils? Before we ask our panelists, take a look at this first.
All votes counted as of Monday noon, after the polls closed in Hong Kong's district council elections. Millions of voters went to the polls on Sunday, with 452 seats of 18 electoral districts up for grabs. More than 2.9 million people showed up to get counted, a record turnout of 71.2%. Both the turnout and the total number of voters reached a record high this year. Elections were held after 5 months of unrest in the city, which has polarized the public. The increasingly violent protests hurt businesses and sent jitters over the electoral process. Starry Lee, the chairwoman of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, apologized for her party's performance. She said violent incidents during the past few months had affected the party's campaign efforts. She did say her party will work even harder to serve citizens and support the government to restore order. Other pro-establishment parties made similar announcements. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Carrie Lam said in a statement that the government respected the election results and wished the peaceful, safe, and orderly situation to continue, and the government would listen to the opinions of members of the public humbly and seriously reflect. Hong Kong has been hard-pressed to restore order in the past weeks. Many are wondering, what's next for the HKSAR?
So after the district council elections, where is Hong Kong headed? Today we have one of the first Hong Kong entrepreneurs to invest in the Chinese mainland as of our panelists. Meanwhile, a law professor will also join us who sits at Hong Kong's Legislative Council. And at the same time, we also invited a student from the Chinese mainland who attended a Hong Kong university. First, joining us on the phone is Dr. LEUNG from PRISCILLA, an associate professor of School of Law at City University of Hong Kong. She's also an Hong Kong HKSAR Legislative Council member. And in our Beijing studio, we have Cheng Siyu, a former project assistant at UNESCO Beijing office. She graduated from the Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen campus. Welcome to our program. But first, let me go to you, Priscilla, if you can hear my voice well.
Yes, very clearly.
Thank you. Tell me about what is the job of district councillor, because you have been serving as district councillor for more than 10 years. Tell me more about that.
Yes. Our district council is one of the level of authorities that we will deal with the daily construction projects as well as urban planning and development projects of the community. So it's sort of more an advisory board and a consultative board in the community. And it is different from the legislative council. Well, legislative council are really voting for bills, for laws, for different kind of the bigger policies. The district council is the grassroots level of decision makers. So if you look at the record of the development in Hong Kong, like for example the project of West Cultural District project.
Yes.
If they want to get more money from the government, they might need to consult the district council, and at least there's not so much objection there, or they can seek for the views of the district councillors of the concerned area. So that is what the district council did.
See.
And the impact of yesterday's election result, I would see, we have to admit that it has been dominated by the opposition, and the pro-establishment only got 13% of the seats. So, which would mean that our grassroots level of community work, as well as development projects, will come into difficulty, maybe even in terms of approval for financial expenditure, budgeting from the government, etc.
I see. Let me ask you about your response to the chief executive of Hong Kong SAR's response to the election result. Carrie Lam, after the 6th District Council election, she said this, issued a Monday statement. The Hong Kong SAR government will listen to the opinions of the members of the public, humbly and seriously reflect. End of quote. That's Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive Carrie Lam after the results of the District Council election were known to the world. Now, your quick reaction to that, Priscilla.
Well, of course, we do respect the result of the election. However, I think both the government, especially the chief executive, also need to address to the concern that this election has been conducted under strong threat of violence. We do have voters, ordinary people, as well as candidates who cannot perform normally. Some may not have the courage to vote. Of course, it may not be the majority. But, you know, there have been a number of districts which only have a very marginal difference of votes, and it does matter. But the worst thing I do when I help people to campaign, we do face this safety issue. And we would like to ask for the government assurance for election environment, because the Legislative Council election is to come next year. And it is still under the present atmosphere that violence is sort of allowed or not being punished promptly. I don't think the election can be conducted fairly again. And so this round, in fact, every one of us, in particular, most of the pro-establishment members, we have faced a lot of threats by this violence. But we still go on with this election because we really do not want to have any chance for these radical rioters to continue the violent attack to our community. And ordinary people are being killed, they may be burned on fire. This is a terrible attack. Now the district council has been conducted. Although we did lose a big majority, however, I have to say we have to call for non-violent environment back to Hong Kong under rule of law. If these people, they don't stop, I have to tell the government that another election, we would not let violence to threaten the whole process. We cannot just let one day to be at peace, but the whole month of campaign period is under violence.
I see.
We can't. So we have to tell the government very clearly, no allowance on violence again for the next election.
Now, I know Dr. Leung has been very passionate about the issue, as we have been speaking to one another on a frequent basis. But let me come back to our studio discussion. With me right here, we have Cheng Siyu. She is a graduate student coming from Shenzhen campus of Chinese University of Hong Kong. Now, you heard Dr. Leung talking about her quick reaction to the results. And by the way, she also graduated from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Because you're alumni over there. So tell me about how do you see, as someone graduated from a Chinese mainland campus of Chinese University in Hong Kong, your reaction to what's happened over the past few months?
Well, my feeling about what happened a few months is the most important part I pay attention to is to my peers' study in their campus. If the event have some affections to their studies, and their study in the campus is the most important thing I pay attention to.
Yeah. So that's the most important thing to you. So when you were in Shenzhen, working on the final graduation, when you see things are evolving like that in university campuses in Hong Kong, have you ever tried to interact with your peers over there on those campuses?
The classes are finished in May, and I went to Beijing to work in UNESCO in June. And at that time, I'm in Beijing and they are in Hong Kong. So we contact each other through WeChat.
Yeah. Through WeChat. So what did you guys talk about and discuss?
And we mainly talk about what your essay goes and how about your study in your campus. Yeah.
Did you check with them as to whether they're safe or not and what's going on the campus?
I will ask if there are some distractions of their classroom, and if you because I will ask them if there are still some food supply in your campus. Yeah.
Yeah. And what were their reaction?
For the past in November, at that time I back to Shenzhen to attend the ceremony of the graduation of myself, and at that time I talked to them, and they face some problems of the food supply in the campus.
I see.
And the class were destroyed, and they can't finish their classes of this semester.
I see.
So they back to Shenzhen and to live in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Shenzhen, or back home.
I see.
Yeah.
So some of mainland students, that's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. We have once again back on the phone Dr. Leung. Dr. Leung, while you were away just for a few minutes, your young alumni, Ms. Cheng, is sitting here in our Beijing studio talking about her, peer interactions with the students from University of Hong Kong in Hong Kong. Now, we have also some problem right now on the phone. So let me come back to you. Right now, Ms. Cheng, after you interact with them, and they stayed on the university campus in Shenzhen, where are they now? And how do they see their future years, whether in the university or go on with their career path?
When they back to Shenzhen and stayed a few days and then back home, because there are different notifications of different universities in Hong Kong. Like the Chinese University of Hong Kong, they said this is the end of this semester, and like the Hong Kong University, and they changed the class into an online class. So many of them back to home to finish the online classes, and some finding some internship in Beijing or Shenzhen.
Okay.
Yeah.
I heard from my producer that Dr. Leung is back with us once again on the phone. Dr. Leung, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. So your young alumni was talking here in the Beijing studio when you were away for a few minutes. So Dr. Leung, tell me what's next do you think should be for Hong Kong? Can Hong Kong heal? Is the divide going to be in a way narrowed as a result of election, or even more? People wonder. Dr. Leung.
Yeah, after the result of this election, of course it is a big blow for the pro-establishment camp. But I still think that there is also a sign that for these radical people, now maybe some of them is for the first time they join the establishment, because district council is one of the establishment of our government, our political structure. And I do call for these people to obey the law, to respect the system, but stop using violence. As I said, we really, under this kind of extreme situation in Hong Kong, we agree that we would go on with this election, which actually is abnormal, is unfair, and there must be a lot of abuse, malpractice, etc. But I have to tell the government very clearly, for those who is responsible for election, we would not accept another violent threat for another election. So if next year our legislative council election cannot have this kind of forewarnings, a lot of threats to different kind of candidates and officers right before the election. So that is our request, our expectation from the government.
Points taken. Dr. LEUNG from PRISCILLA, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now join us also on the phone, we have in Hong Kong, Annie Wu Su-Ching, who is the chair of the Chinese History and Culture Education Foundation for Youth and the Hong Kong Song Ching-Ling Children's Foundation. Annie, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking your time. I know you're traveling in different parts of the world right now. So, Annie, tell me about your quick reaction to what happened over the past 24 hours.
Well, I was watching all the what we call the election campaign and all the vote counting, and the result was within my estimate. I have personally predicted the pro-democracy will win this time, because they have a lot of young voters who just passed 18 years old, and they wanted to try their hand. They wanted to show they have the right to vote, and they want to put in their own candidate into the election. So this is the result, which has been better than my guess. I was thinking that maybe the pro-establishment will lose more seats, but at least they have come to a much more, I will use a much more reasonable percentage.
I see. Annie, if I understand right, over the years you've been trying to help the young people in Hong Kong to understand much better than the history, than if they couldn't have the access to, about the history of China, and try to serve as this bridge between the young people in Hong Kong and the young people on the mainland. Tell me about your takeaways from years of experience doing works like that. What's next? What should be done?
Well, in the last 20 years, I've been doing it personally on my own private capacity. We have taken over 10,000 young people from Hong Kong to mainland China to understand the one country, two system, because we are part of China. And some of them are now becoming policemen, and also in the law and order in different forces. I think in the future, we still have to carry on the usual method of taking younger students. I feel we should start with primary school students, let them go to the what we call the Woman, where we have the Opium War and the museum. And starting from primary schools is much easier that the young children can understand they are part of China, where they are Chinese citizens, but they are born in Hong Kong or they live in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And if we just do it from the secondary school, it's too late. But on the other hand, our Hong Kong HKSAR government, the Education Bureau, has not been very progressive and proactive in handling all these arrangements of getting all the young students in the primary schools, especially asking the schools to do it on a regular basis. So we have been doing it on a very haphazard and not a continuous basis. So this is something that the Education Bureau now should really enforce to put it in the part of the education on understanding being a national, Chinese national. Yeah.
I see. Well, on the visit to Japan, I'm sure, Annie, you have also heard about this. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi did say something about Hong Kong. He was asked about Hong Kong's district council elections. He said the region's status would remain the same regardless of the outcome. Let's listen in.
No matter what happens in Hong Kong, it's a part of Chinese territory. Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, and any attempt to destabilize Hong Kong or even damage its stability and prosperity will not succeed.
Well, that is coming from Mr. Wang Yi, the Chinese Foreign Minister. Annie, of course, that is coming from the Chinese central government officials. But to you, someone who has been devoting your life to Hong Kong, you were born late 1940s, went through all these ups and downs of Hong Kong at very different historical times. What do you make of the current, issues, and how is likely Hong Kong going to move on from your perspective?
Well, we have all these ups and downs, and the last 20 years, the Hong Kong HKSAR government have not been doing actively to educate the young children about the Chinese national identity. So all the problems of today has been the lack of arrangements and lack of progressive understanding and training on the young students. And I would personally blame the education department. They have not done the work properly for the last 20 years. But if we are going to look forward in future, the Education Bureau should now really take a very active role to work with all the primary schools and also to work with the textbook, because the content in the textbook for secondary students are really out of context. They are doing a lot of negative comments, and I would use the word. They are actually talking all the negative elements of China. So they did not overlook and review the books correctly. And they just allow the publishers to confirm the books, and then the schools can buy the books. So if we are talking about national education, the Education Bureau in Hong Kong should really take a very firm hand. And this is the very critical part of Hong Kong.
Got it. Annie, before you go, I understand over the past 5 months of chaos in Hong Kong, as a result of being outspoken, even your family business were impacted, and also some of the shops your family run in Hong Kong were destroyed. Tell me, whether it's from a personal perspective or from someone who's been devoting to Hong Kong's future, tell me about whether Hong Kong will be able to heal, whether people will really narrow the divide, or as a result of the election, things are likely to even go on further. Tell me your gut feelings and what's next, Annie.
My gut feeling is we have to go through another 3 years of slow healing, and also because the young people have a very strong view that they are having providing a better future for Hong Kong. But on the other hand, they overlook that the average person in Hong Kong needs to have a living. If no one can make a decent living in Hong Kong, the whole society will be disarray. So it can have fantasy to build up a new Hong Kong for the young people, but we have to really put our feet on the ground. So my personal observation, just a personal observation, I think for the next 3 years, we are going to go from bad to worse, and the worst is still to come. I'm not very optimistic for the economic situation.
We'll see how things would evolve from here. For now, I want to thank you for joining us, even when you are traveling abroad. Thank you so much, Annie Wu Su King. Really appreciate it. And I also want to express my appreciation for Chen Ziyu, who is a graduate student coming from Shenzhen campus of Chinese University of Hong Kong. Really appreciate for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for making all the way to Beijing for joining us. And you're watching World Insight, still to come on our live program. The red carpet for the foreign students at the University of Chicago. Commitment to open education, according to the university president, in today's Governance Makes a Difference series, coming up right after the break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei. Global governance is indispensable because nations increasingly face enormous challenges that cut across borders and global in scale. Governance can benefit both education that hone in fresh talents and ideas. Recently, we get a chance to hear out some of the world's preeminent experts and scholars. Today, we have the president of the University of Chicago. As the head of an academic institution with the most Nobel Prize winners, Robert ZIMMER emphasized the free and open inquiry as the bedrock of research and education. What do you make of the issue of governance, the qualities of governance, when we see all the current issues, exploding around the world?
I think governance is in fact very difficult. I mean, it's hard to govern. And I think that one of the things we're seeing is the complexity that people face when they're in these environments. And this happens in large corporations, it happens in large governments, it happens in international governance questions, happens in universities. So I think these are challenging questions, and I think people have to work at them, but they're not that easy.
As an educator, how do you think the ideas about better governance can be also learned and cultivated in the young hearts and young minds on your campus?
Well, I think it's an important thing to do, and again, it is quite a complex issue. I think one thing that is extremely important is to talk to everyone constantly about the importance of honesty and absolute integrity in whatever they're doing. Now, honesty and integrity are a foundation because one of the questions about governance is whether there is trust, whether people are going to believe that you're doing things that you say. Not everybody will always agree with you, but it's very important that people believe that you are saying what it is you're doing, and you're taking your actions in an honest way and in a way that's filled with integrity, even if they may disagree with exactly what it is you're doing. And I believe this question of trust is an absolutely importance, and the question of honesty is absolutely importance, and it provides a foundation for dealing with the complexity of governance, which, as I say, is very complicated and not simple.
Trust and honesty, I did notice those two key words you just said. However, if you look at what we are having these days in the world, you notice that is exactly what is lacking here. So is this just temporary phenomenon, or this is going to be with us for quite some time? In other words, this generation is likely to be defined by this struggle about trust and also honesty.
It's a little hard to say. I think, again, if you take a long view, you see these questions arising, they become more intense, then they become less intense. So as somebody who grew up as a student in the 1960s, it's a very tumultuous time around the world.
Exactly.
And
how did you guys survive?
Somehow here we are. And so, you've seen periods like this before. They can't have different qualities because the problems are not the same, but this sense of needing trust is very important. But it can also be a question of, do you agree or disagree with the policies? So what I'd say is honesty and trust are not the only thing, but they form an absolute foundation without which everything becomes more difficult.
But what about building trust in America? You've been addressing this issue, Mr. President, to your students over the past few years. Is there a way to do it?
Well, one of the things that we've been emphasizing to our students is the importance of actual meaningful discourse, which is that when you have somebody who disagrees with you, it's important to both understand what they're saying, but also to accept the fact that people can disagree with you without being evil. It's one thing to say, I disagree with you and think you're wrong. It's another thing to say, I disagree with you and therefore you're evil. And I think a very important feature is to have students understand that not all arguments around a certain issue are going to point in the same direction. The world's a complicated place, and you need to allow for differences of opinion, which are inevitable and, in fact, important for coming to reasonable conclusions.
People look at what is going on now and wonder whether it is the lowest time in their lifetime when it comes to the changes. How come, they wonder? Bottom lines, common sense, have already become a luxury in some cases. Mr. President, what do you make of this period of time that we are experiencing right now? Is this the low time, or is this the dawn before a big thing happens? I don't know. I just want to ask your insight here.
Well, predicting the future is really fraught. I don't know anybody who's really very good at that, and I won't pretend to be.
Okay, that's a smart choice. And what about your analysis of this?
Yeah, but looking back, the 20th century had some periods of extreme destruction at massive scale that is almost unimaginable, except when you continue to look back in history. So we shouldn't imagine that we're in some period where we're at the bottom of the things humanity has shown itself capable of doing. On the other hand, it's obviously a complex time with a lot of change, a lot of unrest, a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of questions about the quality of governance, and we have to try to get ourselves into a better spot so that we don't see repetitions of this kind of massive destruction.
Where's that better spot?
Better spot is one where people are not being murdered, where there's enough conversation so that the kind of miscalculations that can take place are minimized, where people can think about competing, because competing is a healthy thing, but that they're doing so in straightforward, honest ways without demonizing the others. And if we can get to that spot, that would be a better spot.
That is the University of Chicago President Robert Zimmer. Amid China-U.S. trade tensions, Mr. Zimmer sent a university-wide email this June in which he stressed the University of Chicago, his university, would keep its commitment to support international students and academics. He continued to encourage interactions in science and technology and cultural exchanges. During his visit to Wuhan University earlier this June, he said his university would still welcome Chinese students and Chinese scholars. He said international engagement would go on despite difficulties. You were voicing your opinion directly about U.S.-China issue. And you said openly, University of Chicago would welcome international students, just as before. Now, how much does that take political guts to be able to say it?
I think it's honestly pretty straightforward. It's been something that the university's believed in for a long time. We've made a very big effort recently to do yet more of it, and we had a very clear path, and we're committed to the path. And so we went ahead and continued to do it.
I would assume it could not be done without some kinds of opposition, verbally or non-verbally.
Not really. I think there's a degree of question in the United States, I think, as everybody knows, about the relationship, particularly with China. There are issues around evaluation of various immigration policies and so on. So there are definitely things in the air that raise a lot of questions. But when you have a very clear view of what the nature of your education is about, what the nature of the research environment that you want to create create is, and you see the absolute importance of being open and welcoming to people from all countries, it becomes easier to know what to do.
When you think about issues as extreme as decoupling, how much does that impact your understanding of the potential of, state-to-state relations and also educational cooperation?
Well, when we began doing more in China and having more Chinese students come to Chicago, this goes back now over a dozen years, honestly, we knew that there would be times when the U.S.-China relations would be better, there'd be times when they'd be worse. These are two big, complex countries with a lot of interests in common and a lot of competitive interests. And so it's just inevitable that there'll be times when things are better and worse. We're a long-term institution. We take a long view. Our research programs take a long time. Our education programs take a long time. And so we need to be focused on what it is we can do, which is provide outstanding education and a great research environment.
What do you think it might be some of the things the University of Chicago could tell, the stories to the others in your country or elsewhere about what should be the real essence of things when it comes to cooperation, Mr. President?
Yeah, I think there are several things. First of all, people actually need to understand what's going on in the other country much better. If you're sitting in the United States and you look at China, you've got this massive transformation, and people in all sorts of disciplines, students studying all sorts of things, are going to and should want to simply understand, how do you think about that? What can we learn from it? What can the world learn from it? How does one reflect one's assumptions about how to do things based on this? Where is China succeeding? That provide lessons to others. Where is it not succeeding and doesn't provide lessons? So there's a lot to learn from understanding this, and it's so important. Likewise, I think there's an enormous amount to learn for Chinese students and faculty coming to the United States. So I think just from the point of view of providing a good education and a good research environment, this is these exchanges are exceedingly important. On the other hand, I think they obviously also have a long-term benefit to societies, understanding each other and ultimately figuring out how to work together well over time.
Mr. President, the University of Chicago is well known worldwide for churning out the best talent in the academic world. If you look at the number of Nobel Prizes winners that were originally or related to the University of Chicago, it's the biggest possibly. So how do you look at the quality of academic research, basic research, and as a president of a university, how much do you have to put into the long-term thinking about basic research?
Long-term basic research is an absolute foundation of what we do at the University of Chicago, and it needs to be an important feature of every institution. And we create and sustain an environment where people can challenge current paradigms, think about things in very, very different ways, have their ideas tested by ongoing challenge, and this is part of the environment at the University of Chicago that produces so many people who contribute so many new ideas.
What do you really think, fundamentally, Mr. President, is the role of universities?
The role of universities, I think, is really threefold. First is to educate students. And what does that mean? It means to provide them with a set of skills, not just knowledge, but intellectual skills and capacities that's going to serve them for their entire life. How do we think about complex problems? How do we challenge assumptions? How do we look at different points of view? And how do they come together? And how can students learn to make their own synthesis out of these very complex questions in complex world?
Do you have to build a great wall, in a way, to safeguard your students so that they could still have access to the kinds of freedom of opportunities and engagement that they should deserve?
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of pressures around constraining speech, constraining discourse. These have always existed. Sometimes they're more extreme, sometimes they're less extreme.
What about now?
Now I would say there's quite a bit of pressure around this, and we've made a very strong statement about this, now known as the Chicago Principles, been endorsed by over 65 other institutions, and we simply believe very strongly in the importance of this type of education, and we aim to protect it, and we do.
You need to persuade the others, the 65 who signed on this, which you proposed at the very beginning?
Well, I respect other institutions having to figure out what it is they do. I mean, I clearly have an opinion as to what the nature of the most outstanding education is, and we make it very clear, and it's part of the motivation for the Chicago Principles. But ultimately, every institution needs to figure out for itself what it is, because otherwise it won't be effective just giving them advice.
And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN in the search engine, or check out our YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook as well. From me, Tian Wei, everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. See you next time. More insights across China and around the world. Bye for now.